wasn't left to me, I felt obligated to talk to that individual. I don't know. And at this time, Mr. Patrick.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm Michael Patrick. I'm the judge of the City Court in McEwen, and I'm the first judge. I'm Michael Patrick. I'm judge over in McEwen. I'm judge of the City Court there, and I'm the first judge there of the General Sessions Court. I'm also a city attorney for the city of New Johnsonville and prosecutor for the city of New Johnsonville. Can you guys hear me now? Okay. I'm working on it. All right. The Humphreys County newspaper, the News Democrat, is actually the only reporting agency that got one fact about me right. They asked me in what capacity I was filing a petition against the sheriff, and I told them as a private citizen, as a freeholder. And a freeholder is a word from the statute that is used in an ouster proceeding against the sheriff. And all that really means is you're a landowner within the county and a registered voter. So I did not file this as the city attorney of New Johnsonville, as Fox 17, and I guess just about every other news agency has claimed, or reported. I filed it simply as a citizen. I've also been a long-time attorney in Humphreys County. I've had a practice here for over 10 years. So now this is where the catch comes in. When I first decided to speak to the Tea Party, I was very glad that I was approached about it. I was more than happy to speak to everyone about it and speak freely about it. And at that time, I could actually do that. The problem came in, at that time, we had not filed the petition. There was no action before the court. Once there was an action pending, and I'm essentially acting as attorney on behalf of the citizen who signed the petition, then what I can say about that petition is extremely limited because attorneys are forbidden. The language is, a little bit vague, but basically I can't discuss the details of the case in a way that might materially prejudice the case. So I just want to let everyone know what's going on that score. We do have someone here tonight, though, that is, there's one other thing. As everybody is aware, we had a storm this afternoon. We were just about ready to hit print on the copy machine to bring copies of the ouster petition and an amended supplemental petition that we filed. I've been told that some people have an interest in signing this. And we were going to bring that tonight. We have a notary with us. We were ready to go on this. The power went out. I was a Boy Scout. We were prepared. So I had this thing on a disc. I carried it to the house. The power was out at the house. So at any rate, I'm going to ask that if any still want to sign this petition, please come by my office. I'm on West Main Street. And we'll be more than happy to have anybody sign that if they wish to do so. Of course, read it over first, see what you think, make a fully informed decision, then sign if you so desire. One thing, Jerry said something about everybody who signed this has been sued. That, to my knowledge, that is not the case. There is such a thing in the law. The rules of civil procedure govern all civil proceedings. And one of the rules calls for sanctions for people who essentially file a frivolous suit. And the rules also provide that you put the people on notice, and then what you do is you give them a safe harbor. They have X number of days to withdraw the petition, or else the court, they will seek sanctions against you, and the court will, may impose sanctions against the people who filed what they claim is a frivolous suit. They tried that boogeyman. Not one single citizen has withdrawn their name. I have not withdrawn my name. We are proceeding forward on it. And we have a number of people tonight. I hope they don't mind me mentioning their names. but some good folks. We have the McCarsons here, the Rings, and the Cothams. And everyone is in solidarity on this. Why are we doing it? Because we believe it to be the right thing. And if somebody wants to sue me over that and want to be the head law enforcement official in this county, let them go ahead. I'm going to turn the mic over in just a moment to Jake Lockhart. He's the district public defender in the 23rd Judicial District. Jake's out of Cheatham County. And Jake is a pretty fine politician in his own right. Now, Jake comes from a pretty good political family, too, pretty distinguished. His father was W.B. Lockhart, who a long time ago was the District Attorney General for this district. Jake and I actually encountered each other first as teenagers, when my uncle, Alan Wallace, was running against his daddy for DA. Now, as luck would have it, his father won that election pretty good. But we've gone on since that time. We were political enemies at that time. We've become friends. We've worked together, and Jake has been a great assistance in this matter. And unlike me, Jake is not an attorney involved in that. He's not an attorney relator or freeholder who signed this, so he can speak to you about it. By the way, I will tell you, I don't think Jake minds. It's no secret. It's public record. He has been sued by the sheriff. I turn this over to Jake Lockhart, the District Public Defender of the 23rd District.
I do appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak to you tonight. I have been sued by Sheriff Davis, saying that I damaged his reputation in the community. But I'm a firm believer, and my dad raised me to believe if you tell the truth and seek the truth, everything else will take care of itself. As a prosecutor, my father would seek indictments against county officials, and sometimes it's not very popular to seek indictments against certain county officials when they're well liked in the community. And I know there were times he would have to go to 3 or 4 grand juries before he would be able to get an indictment against, for instance, a road superintendent who had been paving people's driveways, private driveways and things like that. And he said there were occasions when, after seeking indictments and getting indictments, that people would not even talk to him. In fact, former Judge Spencer, who I admire tremendously, would get so mad at times he would not talk to my father. But I believe that you should seek the truth, and even though I've been sued, I'm going to tell you what I have uncovered in the investigation in this matter, and I'll let the truth take me where it does. If I end up with a judgment against me, that's fine. I don't think that's going to happen. My lawyer has made a settlement offer to Sheriff Davis, and we've offered him 4 cents in settlement of the lawsuit against me because we don't think it's worth a plug nickel. Now, when this first started, I was appointed, or my office was appointed, to represent a gentleman by the name of Darren Ring. And Darren's mom's here tonight, and as many of you know, and if you've seen the video, it's clear that Darren has had some problems with drug use. And that's not unusual. I have a brother who has 31 years of sobriety. But I'll tell you, it makes no difference whether you have a problem with drugs or alcohol or not. The Constitution still applies to you. And when you're standing in a private yard and you've not committed a crime at all, the Constitution applies to you, and officers can't come in and beat you up, kick your ribs in, and puncture your lung, aggravate a small fracture in your lower back, break your shoulder, and treat a man worse than a dog had been treated. In fact, I'll tell you this, if that video had been of officers kicking a dog like that on the ground, you would have a huge outcry across the country. If Darren Ring had been a black man, you would have had a huge outcry. And I don't mean that in a racist sense. I'm certainly not a racist, but I'm telling you, if that had happened, you would have had a huge outcry in this country. Our district attorney said there was a lot more to this than the 18 minutes of video. And he's referring to the fact that Darren has had some prior legal problems. But that doesn't make a difference, whether you've had prior legal problems or not. Randy Cottom, who's here today, he will tell you he's had some prior legal problems, but he's turned his life around and he's a productive citizen of the community. But that didn't stop the officers from coming to Randy Cottom when Randy stood on his constitutional right not to have his house searched without a warrant. What did the sheriff's department do? Many of you may not know this because it flew under the radar. John Lee Williams, the county attorney, made sure that it flew under the radar. The officers went back and obtained warrants for obstruction of justice against Randy Cottom because he stood on his constitutional right not to have his home searched. They came back, arrested him, roughed him up, and Randy ended up, I think, with close to a $30,000 settlement. And nobody would have known about that but for the fact somebody found it in the fine print in the budget. Well, one of the officers that's involved in that was Tim Hedge. And when you have an officer who shows that he's going to conduct himself that way, as an administrator and a boss, that should tell you that you've got problems with that officer and that you need to make a change there. But our sheriff chose not to make a change. He chose not to take any disciplinary action against Randy Cottom, and he didn't come up with a policy and procedure like the federal judge suggested to be followed in the future. And so what do we have happen next? Tim Hedge is the main antagonist in the beating of Darren Ring. He's the officer who was kicking Darren in the ribs, who broke his ribs and stuck the ribs through his lungs and punctured his lung. Now that's a man that the sheriff knew. That officer had trouble in Dixon County. He had threatened an attorney in Dixon County to set that lawyer up on a DUI because Officer Hedge had lost a case against that officer. That attorney was Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan told him, said, "Buddy, you've got problems, I don't drink." Hedge had beat up a mentally ill man in the jail in Dixon County. I have the jailer who told me he observed that happen. And so you've heard our sheriff say that he doesn't have a crystal ball, but you don't have to have a crystal ball when you have people who have beat up people before, who have gotten you in a lawsuit before that cost you $30,000. When you see that and you know that's happened and the federal judge tells you you've got problems and you need to correct it, then it doesn't take a crystal ball to know that you've got to do that. The Darren Ring lawsuit, the judgment itself was $350,000 against the county. The legal fees, the cost of paying those officers full pay while they were on suspension, and also the fact that they were terminated so that they could draw unemployment, which I think is ludicrous. Those officers should have been terminated for misconduct. It should not have drawn unemployment. The cost total has got to be over $500,000 now. There's another lawsuit fixing to follow. I've talked to the attorney who's going to file a lawsuit on behalf of Glenn Capps, and you probably saw on the news where Humphreys County officers followed Glenn Capps to Hickman County, searched Barnett's record service without a search warrant, and face planted Mr. Capps on a car inside the shop and broke his nose without a warrant, without venue, without any right to be in Hickman County. It wasn't a chase where they were in pursuit with blue lights. They saw this car off the Humphreys County exit on 13. They saw this man go in and buy cigarettes, and they thought it was an unusual hour, so they followed him to Hickman County. That type conduct, ladies and gentlemen, is going to cost you more and more lawsuits in the future. I want you to know, though, how this came about. I didn't set out to make this a news story. I prosecuted here for 12 years. I worked with Chris Davis as a prosecutor for the Drug Task Force. I knew that he had some issues. When I was prosecuting Drug Task Force cases, I knew that he had gotten caught filing false gas claims. He had had a lady at a convenience store save up receipts for him, and he was turning those in and filing false gas claims. I know the director of task force at that time told him if he was caught doing that again, that he would be fired. So I knew he had some issues, but I first wanted to verify and investigate in this matter before I did anything. The first thing I did was to call Sheriff Davis and ask him to handle this matter in-house. Now, this is before I knew there were any allegations against the sheriff for beating Darren Ring in the cell. And he advised me that he had been out there, that you couldn't see well, that the video was two-dimensional, and I don't know what two-dimensional is. How many of you here have seen the raw video on TV? If you would, raise your hand. I don't know what he means by two-dimensional, but I don't care if you have to wear 3D glasses or not. When you watch that video and you see a man cuffed with his clothes pulled off in the snow, being kicked till his ribs cave in and puncture his lung, you don't have to have anything else to know that something was done terribly wrong there. Darren Ring was treated in an unconstitutional matter, and the sheriff should have taken action to make sure something was done about that. So the first thing I did was call the sheriff and ask him if he would please to handle it in-house, to dismiss those officers, take some action. And he told me that it was two-dimensional video, that I couldn't see what was really going on, and that his officers had done no wrong, and he was not going to take any action. So next I thought, I'll go one step up. I called John Lee Williams, the county attorney. I don't know if any of you have ever dealt with John Lee Williams, but John Lee can be opinionated, to say the least. And if John Lee thinks he's right, you're not going to change his mind. John Lee said the officers had done no wrong. And I said, John Lee, just look at the video. If you'll just see the video, you'll see that the county needs to take some action. Because I wanted the county to do something so that this could be handled in-house and not get out in the public. John Lee refused. Next, I called Dan Alsbrooks, our district attorney, and found out he was already aware of the video. His investigator had already seen the video, and he had not requested an investigation. And I didn't know anywhere to go higher than the district attorney. He's the chief law enforcement officer in the district, including Humphreys County. And at that point, I told him, I said, well, the sheriff's not going to do anything, the county attorney's not going to do anything, you're not doing anything, I'm going public with the video. And that's when I went public and released the video to the media. That was not my first choice. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to shed a bad light on Humphreys County. But if the sheriff, John Lee Williams, and the DA were not going to do anything about it, I couldn't stand by and do nothing and have it on my conscience the next time somebody was beaten badly or even killed. And I'll say this, I've had 20 to 30 allegations against this department that I have not gone forward with because I didn't have any type of audio or video or any way to substantiate what happened. So there have been a lot of similar claims before. So what I did, first I interviewed Darren Ring, of course, and got his statement. And then separately, I interviewed people in the jail, including jailers. You've read in the News Democrat where Darren Ring was taken to the hospital and supposedly refused medical treatment. Well, the fact of the matter was he was taken to the hospital with no clothes on and he did not want to go in naked. He was embarrassed. And I submit a lot of you, if you were there with no pants and no underwear on, would not want to go into a hospital in that condition. Now, how was I able to verify that? I was able to verify that through talking to jailers. I'm not going to use their name, but there's a fine lady that works at that jail that a lot of you probably know, and she verified that he was brought in naked. She went and got a blanket so that he could be covered up. She felt so embarrassed for him. That jailer advised that he was wrapped up in the blanket and drugged to the cell by the sheriff and other officers. I talked to 4 different inmates who observed Darren Ring be beaten again in the jail by Sheriff Davis with the deputy holding his head down as Darren Ring was on a concrete bunk. Sheriff Davis put his hands up against the wall, and while he had his hands up against the wall, he was taking his knee and hitting Darren Ring in excess of 10 times. Now, these were witnesses that were interviewed separately. I also had the FBI interview these witnesses. The FBI was very impressed with the candor and credibility of Stephen Barbie in particular. He was so upset when this was happening, he got on the phone and called his father, asked his father to get a lawyer to the jail. His father was also interviewed and verified that happened. So these are not allegations that are pulled out of thin air. That same female jailer went back and recovered the taser prongs from Darren Ring. There were allegations also that Darren and the other inmates had advised me that he was tased again in the jail while handcuffed. This female jailer told me she personally went back, took the prongs, wrapped them up in a piece of cloth, took them back out and gave them to a city officer. So I wasn't making these allegations lightly. I investigated them. I had the FBI investigate those also. You've heard that the Sheriff's Administration has not been filing the R-84 disposition cards, and that may not mean a lot to you, but what that is a card that when there's a disposition on a case, they send that card to the TBI so that it can be put on a criminal history. And there was a gentleman in the county who had had a charge dismissed, a weapons charge dismissed, but because the sheriff's office went several years without sending these dispositions in, when he was in an airport out of country, he was detained because it still showed a pending weapons charge on his history. And so it made it look like he was perhaps trying to escape the jurisdiction of the United States. There are people who have lost jobs because dismissals were not sent in. The other side of that coin is an even more dangerous. If someone gets a DUI conviction in this county and that card is not sent in, then the next time that person is pulled over for DUI, guess what their criminal history is going to show? No prior DUIs. I have personally represented people who had multiple offense DUIs, but because Sheriff Davis did not send in the disposition cards, when they went to trial, they were only convicted of first offense DUI. And what does that do? That takes a multiple offense DUI offender who should be off the roads and should not have a license for 2 or more years, and it puts them back on the road. That endangers the citizens of this community. If an officer makes an arrest, and during that arrest, the offender draws a weapon on that officer, and he's convicted of aggravated assault with a weapon in Humphreys County, and the sheriff doesn't send that disposition card in, and an officer in Dixon pulls that car over and runs the tag, guess what's not going to be on the criminal history? That prior conviction for assault with a weapon. And so that officer's life is going to be in danger. I have verified through the clerk's office through Edie Stanford that the sheriff did these for a short period of time and then stopped and went years without filing these. I've talked with former Sheriff Ronnie Tungette, who I think is a fine gentleman, and his feelings have been really hurt because the administration has blamed this on him and said that he stopped doing it. And a young lady in the sheriff's department has really hurt Ronnie's feelings because Ronnie knows he did these cards just like he was supposed to, and now they're trying to blame it on Ronnie Tungette. And that just gives you an idea how far this administration is willing to go. And I can tell you that I'll be taking depositions this month based on my civil suit. I've already talked to officers within the department and former officers who are going to verify and swear under oath that Chris Davis had them not arrest people for DUI. One county commissioner who had left the boardwalk, who was so intoxicated he was driving on the wrong side of the road, but the officer said that he was instructed by Sheriff Davis just to follow them home, not stop and arrest them. I'm going to have a sworn deposition from a current officer who will testify that Sheriff Davis protected certain people in the community, people who were either active in his campaign or donated to his campaign. A gentleman by the name of Lim Polk and his son Scotty Polk. Scotty Polk, in his proffer in federal court, advised that he had paid Sheriff Davis for protection. And I have an officer who's going to give a sworn deposition as to exactly how that happened in regard to him and how that happened in regard to other people where they were let go on criminal charges, were not charged on criminal charges. Clerks in Lane's office are going to give sworn depositions that people arrested for domestic violence were released early by Sheriff Davis. One was a friend of his, and he was released without the restriction on the domestic violence bond conditions in regard to a weapon, and he immediately went duck hunting with Sheriff Davis. They also know of a pregnant woman who was almost 9 months pregnant, who had found out that her husband was having an affair, and she slapped her husband when she found out. And that's what my wife would do to me if I was lucky. She's told me that because she's a registered nurse, she knows where my heart is, and she would just stab me in my sleep. But I've told her I hope she'd give me a chance to explain if she heard that. But these depositions, I've got 5 officers who are willing to give sworn depositions in regard to how the sheriff protected people, let people go on DUIs. One officer who signed the ouster petition, who has provided information in regard to a pontoon boat being bought by the sheriff's father, and the sheriff having extensive work done on that pontoon boat and treating it as though it was his own, which is a violation of the statutes. But I just wanted you to know that this was not something where I just heard rumors and decided to go after them. My client's charges have been dismissed for a long time now. I'm a public servant who believes it's my duty to expose corruption. I think it should be the district attorney's duty to do that, but he's chosen not to do so. And I'll give you an example. I prosecuted 12 years, so I know what you do and what you don't do. How many of you ever sat on a grand jury before? Anybody? Did any of you ever spend 3 days on one case? If so, raise your hand. Any of you hear testimony on a murder case? Okay. And how long did you spend on that murder case? Just ballpark. In the grand jury? No, a trial jury. Yeah, a trial jury you will. In grand jury, you may spend an hour or two on the most serious charges. And here's the reason for that. As a prosecutor, all you're supposed to determine is there probable cause that an officer committed a crime. In the Darren Ring case, you're supposed to determine is there probable cause that these officers assaulted Darren Ring when they kicked and tasered and beat him with batons, broke his ribs, punctured his lungs, broke his shoulder, did all the damage they did to him, is their probable cause. You put on only the proof necessary for that. And the reason for that is, as a prosecutor, you don't want to get the grand jury to start trying to try the case. You don't want a grand jury to try the case. That's for a trial jury. If you want to make sure that there's no indictment, then you take 3 days, like our DA did on the Darren Ring case, and you put on not testimony just showing what happened, but you bring in witnesses from both sides, and you get the grand jury to try the case. You don't show the video on a large screen, and you don't use the enhanced audio where you hear one of the officers say, "This guy's a douchebag, let's F him up," before they start beating him. You don't do that beforehand. And that's exactly what our DA did. How many of you saw the photographs of Johnny Turner on the news where he had the boot marks and the full cleat marks on his back? Same thing with that. The DA took that to the grand jury. Mr. Turner called me and said all he was trying to do was say I was a member of a motorcycle gang. I don't know if Mr. Turner's a member of a motorcycle gang or not, or ever was, but it doesn't make any difference. He still has the same constitutional rights as I do. And officers should not be able to stomp him in the back when he's face down and leave boot marks, cleat marks, and steel lash marks all over his back. And what lends Mr. Turner credibility, he did not want a penny. He didn't file a civil suit, didn't want to file a civil suit. All he wanted to do, he wanted this administration to stop treating people the way he was treated. But we have a district attorney who is not seeking justice in these matters. Guess how many times he's taken the Darren Ring matter back to a grand jury? Can somebody guess? 0. Exactly. He's not seeking indictments. He's not seeking justice in this matter. He's been friends with the sheriff for a long time, and he's going to do what he can to protect the sheriff. I saw that from the first day I called him and found out he was aware of the video but had not requested an investigation. Guess what he did when I told him I was releasing that video to the media that day? He wrote a letter requesting an investigation. He had to, because his hand was being forced. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm not making things up. There are going to be people, officers, including former Sheriff Ronnie Tungette and other fine officers who are going to verify the allegations that I've talked to you about tonight. And once those depositions are in, I'll be glad to provide copies to this organization so they can read and be informed in regard to what these people say. And these are officers and people like Sheriff Tungette. He doesn't have any extra grind in this. Ronnie's got his time in. He can retire yesterday if he wants to. But they're good people. They're stepping forward now, and they're saying something has to be done, and that we've got a tyrant in office and something has to be done. Any questions?
If you have a question, please come forward. If there's any question by the pastor, and he'll ask it for you, or he'll give you the microphone so you can ask.
And I'll say this, I have issued a challenge to the sheriff to meet him here again, if y'all would have us, and go over all of these matters. I've been sued too, just like he has, but I'm not afraid to step forward and tell the truth, because I know the truth is a defense in my lawsuit. And the things that he's accused me of defaming him by saying that he condoned the conduct of these officers, he says that hurt his reputation. How many of you saw him on the news when he said his officers had not done anything wrong? I mean, he said that on the news. He told me that he was out there. A DA's office investigator told me that he was out there. And the sheriff told me in the terms he uses, he said, "Cuz." Sometimes he calls people cuz. He said, "Cuz, them boys didn't do anything wrong. I'm not doing anything to them." Yes, ma'am.
Jane Williams,
Good to see you.
this organization, what effect this settlement has on the federal indictments, if any. Thank you.
The civil settlement will have no effect on the federal indictments whatsoever. Settlement offers have been made to former Deputy Lee and Hedge. I think one has been offered 2 years at 100%, and one's been offered, Hedge, I think, has been offered more than that. I suspect that they'll try to cut a deal with one of those two deputies to testify against the sheriff. The federal government, as you may know, is slow. They had the video of what took place in the yard, and it took them 9 months to indict the officers in regard to what happened in the yard. The assistant U.S. attorney after that said they were just beginning their investigation on Sheriff Davis, and so I anticipate that to take 18 months to 2 years before they finish that. So there's a good chance he'll be close to finishing his term before any federal action will be taken. But the civil settlement doesn't affect those cases at all. It just means that those officers, the sheriff and the deputies, can no longer be sued for damages. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Catherine Candy Miller. I don't know whether you said it or not, but let me see. When he came out and before they started beating on Mr. Ring, was he swearing or socking anybody? Was, flinging his hands at the sheriff or something like that to give them cause to treat him like that?
No, ma'am. I've seen an enhanced video as well as heard the audio. The proper procedure in a case like that is to tell the person what to do. In other words, tell the person, put your hands up against the wall. Tell the person, put your hands behind your back so that I can cuff you. What they told him was, don't put your hands in your pocket. And as they stood there and talked, it was cold outside, he started to lower his hands to put it in his pocket. They told him again not to put his hands in his pocket. And at some point, the officer decided they were going to go ahead and take him down. When they grabbed him and took him down, he had not done anything. In their reports, they say that he tried to grab one of the officer's pistols. But if you watch that video and watch it closely, you'll see he reaches for nothing. Even when they grab him and he's going to the ground, his hands are out to the side like this. So he clearly did not grab or attempt to grab a pistol. The only thing that he did do, immediately upon being thrown down, they sprayed him with pepper spray. And instead of using a stream type, they used a cone type, and his mouth was filled with pepper spray, and he did spit it out. And he doesn't deny that that may have gotten in the officer's eyes. He wasn't concerned about where he was going. He was spitting it out of his mouth. And Darren was incredibly honest all the way along. Before he was beaten at the jail, I asked him, I said, Darren, what happened? And, of course, he was upset over what had already happened to him. He was still cuffed with his hands cuffed behind his back with one handcuff connected to the shackles on his legs so that he was virtually bent backwards. And when they brought the warrant in and handed it to him, which they shouldn't have done, they could have done that the next day, he was upset and he spit on the warrant. And I know that's not right, but it doesn't give them the right to beat him again, hold him down on a concrete cell, and the sheriff knee him in the abdomen and the ribs again, and for him to be tasered again while in that cell and while being handcuffed. So that's, none of that was justified. Was Darren, was he messed up that night? Yes. And he was honest about it. His mom's here. She knows he was honest about it. He told him, yeah, he'd smoked 4 or 5 joints of marijuana that day and had used meth 2 days before. But he wasn't bothering anybody. And the yard he was in, the lady that was renting that house had invited him over, and he'd spent the night. So he was standing in a private yard. He was impaired. Some of y'all may have been impaired in your own home or your own yard. If so, that's not a crime. And he had not committed a crime. And the officers, as soon as they came up, verified that the sounds that had been heard were firecrackers, not gunshots. So they knew this was not a situation with gunshots. The Gallatin chief of police and the Chattanooga chief of police viewed the video and were prepared to testify that it was terrible police brutality, that they exceeded force necessary tremendously, and not only that, that they asked if they could use the video to teach their own departments how not to handle a crime scene. Any of you see the video and see the guy walking around with the big stick, looked like walking tall, actually walked over to where the officers were with Darren Ring on the ground? That was terrible police procedure to allow a bystander to walk up to him carrying a big stick. And his intentions may have been good, but you don't know that if you're an officer. And so both those departments said that it was excessive force and asked if they could use that video to show to their officers to tell them this is what you do not do, and use it as a teaching mechanism. Yes, ma'am. That's okay.
Did they pull his clothes off out there in the snow?
They pulled his pants off out there in the snow. When they grabbed him, they jerked him out of his shoes. He was wearing slippers, or what I call, it's like a house shoe that you just slip your feet in. They jerked him out of his slippers, and then when you watch the video, you'll see one of the officers come around, grabs his pants, and pulls his pants down so that he is, at that point, naked in the snow. And the other thing that you'll notice on that video, you'll hear an officer tell him, we're going to cause volts of electricity to be put through your body if you move. If you move an inch or whatever, we're going to electrocute you. And right after that, you hear another officer tell him, put your hands out in front of you. Well, as soon as he starts to put his hands out in front of you, that other officer says, tase him, and they start tasing him. So they're giving him contradictory commands. You can't win when one officer tells you, if you move, we're going to shock you, and then the other officer tells you, move your hands out in front of you, and then they do shock you. You don't have a chance. And you'll hear him on there also, when they're telling him to roll over, he's saying, I can't. And I hope none of you have ever been tased, but when you've been tased like that multiple times, you can't. You lose control of your muscles for a period of time, and so they were tasing and kicking and striking him all at the same time, and he's telling them, I can't. That's because when you've been tased, you can't roll over. You can't move your muscles. Thank goodness, finally, Officer, I think it was Parnell with the city, stepped in and did what should have been done to start with. He just stepped in and said, pull the prongs, let's roll him over and cuff him. And that's what they did. They had the manpower there to do it. You had several big officers there. They could have rolled him over and cuffed him just like they did at the end. And they didn't choose to do that. They chose to beat, kick, and tase him for a long period of time. Yes? Sheriff Davis was present at some point in time. He told me when I called him, he said, cuz I was out there and you can't see everything that was happening. The video is two-dimensional. and it was dark. One of the police reports puts him on the scene, apparently helping the officer that got pepper spray in his eye. So I don't know if he was intent on working on the officer that had pepper spray in his eye, if he was seeing what was going on or hearing what was going on or not. That I don't know. I do know he was at the scene at some point and apparently was treating the officer that got pepper spray in his eye. But whether he saw what happened or had an opportunity to put a stop to it while it was going on, that I don't know. Yes, sir.
I thought I had a question and maybe it was a statement, but I have talked to a supposedly eyewitness. This is a person that I talked to today who was there on the video.
Okay.
He does not support the statement that the sheriff was there during or before the abuse. This is a piece of information that I have from a man that I talked to.
Right.
I don't know what that means, but there's a conflict in data. I just want to point that out.
And I have not said that he watched what went on. I don't know. I do know he was out at the scene. He told me he was out at the scene and that it was dark and that you couldn't see well and the video was two-dimensional. John Etheridge with the District Attorney's Office, investigator, told me that Sheriff Davis was out at the scene, but I can't tell you at what point he arrived and if he arrived in time to do anything. I can tell you that after watching the video, that he certainly could have and should have done something more than place the officers on suspension with pay. And he chose not to do that. Yes, sir.
Cleared something up with me. I want to ask the question. It's very, very important.
Yes, sir.
What was a call for out to the residents for?
There was a call of possible gunshots. On the first part of the video, they stopped and talked to a gentleman. He says, I don't know if it was firecrackers or gunshots, but it didn't sound like firecrackers. So the first question they asked Mr. Ring and the other gentleman when they got there, had there been any gunfire? And they advised that there had not, that there had been firecrackers. And so they ascertained that there were no gunshots involved immediately.
That there was no gunfire involved.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. They did know that. The first thing they talked to Mr. Ring and the other gentleman that was standing there, they ascertained that there were no guns and that nobody had a gun and that there had been firecrackers that had been shot. The girl, and I can't remember the girl's name, who was renting that house, had shot firecrackers. And that's what the gentleman had heard. It absolutely is very important. And listen, I've had cases where officers have used force that was perhaps too extreme. And I saw one case where it happened where he was arresting a guy for DUI, and the officer didn't have any backup. And there was somebody in the suspect's car behind him. And so he was very concerned about getting the man cuffed as quickly as possible. And he got overzealous, and he beat the man with a steel asp until the man had to go get stitches. But I understood that officer's fear and concern because there was a guy in the car behind him. And so I went to that officer and went to that department. It was Dixon City. And I asked the chief of police to handle that matter as far as discipline. And I told that young officer, I said, you don't want this case going in front of a jury and a jury seeing what you did. I said, I can understand to some extent that you were afraid, and you're afraid that guy's going to come out of the car, but you don't want a jury seeing you beat somebody like you did that guy. That was handled. He was disciplined within the department, and that matter was handled without having to go to the media or anything else.
To get his hands out of his pocket
Yes, sir.
several times.
Several times, yes, sir.
As an officer, I had pulled a guy over for DUI.
Right,
Told him to get his hands out of his pocket.
right,
Once, he kept going in, you could see him going around something.
right,
And the third time, I got his hands out of his pocket, I turned him around and cuffed him.
right,
He had a hawkbill knife in that pocket he was going around.
right.
So it's very important to know what step-by-step thing was that brought about the altercation, but not justifying it either way in this case.
Right.
But I just want to know those because you brought those things out.
Right. On the enhanced video, when you look at it on a big screen, when he takes his hands out, you'll actually see him pull his pockets inside out. The officers knew that he did not have a weapon. And again, the proper procedure there is to tell the person what to do. Particularly when you have a person who is impaired, you don't keep telling them don't do something, you tell them what to do. For instance, they're right there at a house. You could have told him, and a car. You could have told him, put your hands up against the car and spread your legs. If you tell the person to do that, and they don't do it, then you go ahead and turn them around and cuff them for your own safety. That could have been done. But the officers didn't choose to do that. They kept telling an impaired man, don't put your hands in your pocket. And on the video, you will see he never put his hands back in his pocket one time. Not one time. He brought his hands down from up here, lowered, but they didn't tell him don't lower your hands. They told him not to put them back in his pocket. He never put his hands back in his pocket one time after he was told not to do so. But when he started to lower his hands, that's when they grabbed him and threw him to the ground. But I'll say this, there is no excuse for officers lying on reports and saying he was trying to grab a pistol and making up facts to justify acts of brutality that they did. And there's no excuse for the sheriff as administrator for not taking disciplinary action against those officers. Now, I understand now why he couldn't, because of the allegations against him in the jail. If he had fired those officers on the spot, they may have turned on him. So I understand that. I saw another hand.
You say that they went to the house because of the firecracker noise.
Yes.
All right, now the firecracker, they know it's firecrackers. Why did they pick on this guy? What was the next, what happened then? Why all of a sudden they go on him?
Had a previous history. And they have had, he's been in trouble before with the law. And when you hear that one officer say, he says, this guy's a douchebag, let's F him up. That's the reason. He did nothing. He was in a private yard, impaired, which is not against the law. That one statement tells you all you need to know. When you hear the officer say he's a douchebag, let's F him up, those officers had decided that they were going to rough him up. And they just forgot that they were doing it on video. By the way, they later showed that video at a Super Bowl party and had a big time with that video. And that tells you a little bit about the intelligence of those officers. Super Bowl party. What did I say? Oh, okay, yeah.
I commend you on one statement you made on in-house, handling the situation on in-house,
Yes.
which our prosecutor failed to do.
Right.
If a prosecutor approached it right to discipline the officers or whatever the incident was, and then made the person involved there say no charges against the county, the taxpayers.
Right.
It's dismissed.
Right.
And then went ahead after the officers. That would have saved everybody.
if they'd have been handled right, they would have dismissed the charges against Darren. He wouldn't have sat in jail 5 months. And Darren didn't care about suing or anything else. He just wanted to be out of jail because he didn't think he'd done anything. And when the U.S. attorney asked him what he wanted, he didn't say, I want these officers to do a lot of time. He just said, I just want whatever you think is justice. That's all he said, whatever you think is justice.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up.
Got one more here.
Jake, I got a question on that.
All right.
I watched this over and over a number of times. I live here in this county. I have children that live here. My name is Pat Sensing. And I have grandchildren that live here. If I'd have been out there and that happened, and it was one of my family, my child or my grandchild, and I'd have took that big stick and beat the hell out of them because they beat that man unmercifully for no reason. Would I been what would happen to me?
You would have been killed more than likely.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm Richard Garber.
Yes, sir.
You're going to be the prosecutor in the ouster proceeding?
No, sir.
You're not.
Mike Patrick is going to be prosecuting the ouster.
Okay, what is the process going to be in that
All right, it's
procedure?
set.
How long is this going to take?
It is set, the ouster proceeding is set for trial November the 5th. Between now and that time, they will go through discovery process, written interrogatories, depositions, that type thing. There'll be subpoenaed records for instance, from the comptroller's office that will verify that the disposition cards were not being done. And by the way, the statute on the disposition cards, I think you can see why that's so important that they be sent in. The statute says if the sheriff fails to do that through malfeasance or nonfeasance, which clearly if he was doing it and stopped, that is malfeasance and nonfeasance, that statute says the district attorney shall file an ouster against that sheriff. Now that's not going to happen in this county because our district attorney is not going to file an ouster or take any action. But that's what the statute provides. The legislature felt like those cards were so important. And it is. You don't want multiple offense DUI drivers out here getting first offense convictions because the sheriff hadn't sent in the dispositions on their prior convictions. It puts drunk drivers on the street.
If it's by November the 12th, 5th, 2013.
Yeah, you'll be lucky. I don't anticipate that it'll be tried by jurors from this county. I suspect there'll be so many people who have opinions that they'll probably have to bring in an outside jury, would be my guess.
Do you want to take this as a couple minutes and let the people know if they
Want to sign a petition, number one, what's required? They have to be property owners, or and what the petition would do, how they get benefit if they do or don't sign a petition, and let them know where Mr. Patrick's office is.
Yeah, if you're property owners and want to sign the petition, it's at Mr. Patrick's office, which is right there on Courthouse Square, right up from the boardwalk and the thrift store. You'll see his office. The advantage to that is it shows strength in numbers in the county of people who want this matter looked into. It's not saying that you think he should be ousted without a chance for due process and a trial. It's just saying these allegations have been made and we think there needs to be an investigation, and if the facts are there, he needs to be ousted. But only if the facts are there.
I think it should be looked into by an unbiased judge.
Right, it's requested an investigation, and if the investigation bear out the facts, that he be ousted from office.
Mr. Lockhart here is involved.
He loves people. He loves people. He and Judge Birch, I believe, are involved in a drug rehab situation.
It's a drug court program that we started 11 years ago.
Tell them the results of that.
I've 12 years, and I am a born-again Christian. I wear my faith on this arm, says his pain, our gain. And I know some people don't like tattoos, but inmates relate to tattoos. And so that's a segue for me to get to witness to inmates a lot because they like tattoos. And then I have my family crest on this arm. My ancestor fought in the Crusades with King Robert the Bruce and brought his heart back to be buried in Scotland, and therefore the name Lockhart. That's where my name came from. But anyway, I prosecuted for 12 years, and I enjoyed it. And my dad was a prosecutor, but I kept seeing people coming into court that I was prosecuting that had drug and alcohol problems and really needed help as much as anything, and that we could save a lot of money if we came up with a program to help them. So, you know, God chose me and led me in the direction of getting a drug court started. I wouldn't have picked Judge Birch for anything in the world. He'd have been my last choice. But Judge Alan Wallace was retiring. His demeanor would have been excellent for something like that. Judge Leonard Martin was retiring. And so my only choice was Judge Birch. And this is a judge that on his laptop has a picture of Vlad the Impaler on his laptop. And on violations of probations, he locks you up if you violate any rule, no matter. So he wasn't my first choice. That just shows how God can use people. God laid it on Judge Birch's heart that he may still be Vlad the Impaler in regular court, but in drug court, he needs to be somebody who loves the participants. And so we started out 11 years ago. It is a faith-based program. Each graduate gets a Bible, and I'm proud to say that 82% of our graduates have stayed out of the criminal justice system and have stayed clean and sober. And it's one of the more fulfilling things that I do. I can tell you it's not very fulfilling to sit beside somebody who has confessed to a murder and clearly is guilty of murder. But it is my duty to protect their constitutional rights, and I will do that, and I'll sit beside them, and I'll give them a trial, and I'll fight hard for them. But it's a lot more fulfilling to see a young black lady who was addicted to crack cocaine, who rolled over on her baby in bed and killed it and lost custody of all her children, and to see now that 9 years later she is still sober. She has custody back of her other kids, and she was pregnant at the time she came in our program, and she had a crack-free baby. I can tell you that having a crack-free baby saves over $300,000 in medical costs. I can tell you that each participant in our drug court program, they pay their way. We run our own sober living houses. We mandate that they get a job. We mandate that they pay taxes. We mandate that they pay child support. We keep them in our program 2.5 to 4 years. It's a long program. But it gets to be a habit being a good citizen. It gets to be a habit going to church. It gets to be a habit learning that without God, you can't change your life. And it makes a difference. So God took a prosecutor who was a hard-nosed prosecutor and took a judge who was a hard-nosed judge and used them to come up with a compassionate program that we saved the taxpayers. We've calculated $900,000 plus a year in incarceration costs for these people that are in our program. No, the best thing ever happened to us, we didn't get a federal grant. We wrote one asking for it, and we didn't get it. And of course, what that does, when you don't get a federal handout, what do you have to do? You have to learn to do for yourself. And so we started our own field, our own sober living residences. We have a thrift store in Dixon that's making over $10,000 a month. We make our participants pay anywhere from $100 to $110 a week rent in our houses, and we generate money for treatment dollars. I volunteer on the team. We have several volunteers. We're not paid. We're there to help others. We believe it's a ministry and a mission, and it's just great to see people turn their lives around. And it's really a problem in Humphreys County. There's a bad meth problem here. And if we could get our graduates to never come back to Humphreys County, I'm not speaking bad against Humphreys County, but when they come back around the same people they've hung out with before and used with and cooked with, then they're going to have temptations, they're going to have problems. Chad Massey, I don't know if you know Chad, he's with our program. Chad cooked and used for years. He works with our program right now, and he is rock solid in his sobriety, and they learn about God. Doug Beecham, that works with our program, he hated God because he had a daughter that was born blind, and he blamed God for it, and he hated God. And when he first started trying to work the program, he told his sponsor, I don't believe in anything I can't see. And the sponsor took a Bible and dropped it on the table and asked him if he heard that, and said, yeah. And he said, what made that fall? He said, gravity. He said, can you see it? No. Can you touch it? No. Well, that began, he started, and that sponsor was smart. He said, I want you to pray every day to the God you hate and don't believe in. And so after 3 weeks of praying to the God he hated and didn't believe in, he accepted God and believed God. And his daughter has told him, she graduated, I can't remember all those cum laudes, whichever one it is, straight 4.0 straight A's in college, and she works with disabled children. She told him, Dad, I would not want to be any other way than blind right now. God made me blind so that I could work with the people I work with, and he made you a drunk so you could work with the people you work with. And that's true. That's true. I mean, you read Romans 7, and oftentimes we don't realize the tribulations and the things we're going through at the time, what it's going to mean to us later. I have a son who's had 35 brain surgeries, in the coma for a month one time in the hospital. I had a hard time understanding at the time and felt like I was reaching the limits of what God could give me strength to get through. But I look back on it now, and it taught me more patience and more character than anything that could have happened to me. And by the way, he's doing well. Hadn't had a surgery in 4 years, and doctor said he'll never have to have another surgery again. So, and he wasn't even supposed to live as long as he has. He'll be turning 30 next year. So, but anyway, God and showing Christ's compassion is behind a lot of what I do. And I believe that God would have us seek out injustice and make it right. And that's all I'm trying to do. Some people have said, I'm trying to help myself politically. I'm not trying to help myself politically. I know Sheriff Davis has a lot of friends in this county, and I know that's not going to help me. And I don't intend to run for anything else. I like what I do. I'm a part of a good ministry in doing what I'm doing. I'm not running for anything else. I'm content where I'm at. God wants me where I'm at, and that's where I'm staying. Any other questions? I didn't mean to preach, but yeah. Yes, sir. Any more questions? I mean, we're way over time here. All right.
So, brother,
I will stay and talk to anybody that wants to talk to me afterwards. Mine's real simple. Unless I heard wrong, you were saying that Mr. Patrick would be the judge that would be presiding over the trial. No, correct? No, not the judge. He, Mr. Patrick, is one of the citizen relators who have filed the petition. But because he's a lawyer, he will be handling most of the prosecution of the ouster. He will not be the judge. They brought in a judge from outside the county, a retired Court of Criminal Appeals judge, civil appeals judge, Judge Cantrell, who doesn't know anybody in the county, has no interest one way or the other. Well, I mean, it's the fair way to do it. It's the fair way to do it.
Hey, brother, I appreciate you coming.
we're looking to hear from you again. I believe we heard some things that we didn't read in the News Democrat. I'm looking forward to the sheriff's appearance to defend himself on these issues, and that's the right thing to do. We offer that. We need to thank Mr. Lockhart, Mr. Patrick for coming, and I think it's part of the information deal. It's our job to put it out there because we do deal with the elected officials in this county, state, and federal government. And the sheriff is one of them. And we appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
We'll be back to our normal fourth Monday next month, and we're probably going to try to deal with some more county elected officials or school board, that kind of stuff, maybe the judges. So come back and see us, people.